This bear swam basically 2 miles an hour for 9 days straight. She never really varied her rate of speed and just plugged north.
One of the things I'm hoping to measure is how much does it cost a bear to swim, and how does that compare to what it costs a bear to walk?
2008, we had a wake-up call because one of the bears that we equipped with a radio collar decided to go for a swim. The Beaufort Sea at that time, up to 400 miles north of the coast, was completely ice-free. The bear eventually followed the sea ice back to the Alaska coast, and we were able to recapture her on the shore and retrieve her collar. And from her collar, we were able to download all of the data. We had great accelerometer data.
An accelerometer, it's a small electronic device, and it basically measures changes in motion. They've started to incorporate them into smartphones and tablets. For those devices, it basically recognizes when you rotate it, that you've turned it and it'll flip the screen, those sorts of things.
And it was like, wow. We knew polar bears would go swimming. And in years past, they enter leads and swim between ice flows. Probably up until the mid-90s, when they had to swim from land to ice, the distance wasn't all that far. Maybe 100 miles, but not 400 miles. Still, 100 miles is a pretty long ways, too. So it really sheds some light on the capabilities of these bears.
So there's been research done with wild animals using accelerometers that have shown that you can actually correlate measures of acceleration, body acceleration from the accelerometer with energy expenditure. To do that, again, it involves using captive animals to apply to wild animals.
In 1985, we began using collars that operated by ultra-high frequency radio waves. These radio waves are actually transmitted to polar orbiting satellites. So we don't have to go fly around in an aircraft to go and find our polar bears. But the polar bears themselves are telling us where they are because each collar is sending a signal to a polar orbiting satellite. That data is sent to a ground receiving station, and then it is sent to us. The data that we receive from these collars is not just location data, but also activity data, whether the bear is walking around or whether it's sitting.
The accelerometer data is essentially in a waveform. It's sort of like looking at an EKG in terms of what it looks like. For example, if a bear is walking, you get this repetitive pattern as the bear makes a football. So you get this waveform with each step that the bear is making, and you get these large spikes in acceleration with each footfall.
This line here is what's called static acceleration, and it's measuring the actual orientation of the tag, how the tag is moving in terms relative to gravity. With each step that she's making, you get this undulating pattern that the actual animal's making, and that's reflected in the orientation of the tag as she moves up and down with each step. And then over here, she stops briefly for about 5 seconds to take a drink of water. She puts her head down, which is what this large wave and orientation represents, as her putting her head down. She's drinking, and you get these lower magnitude waves in terms of what's called dynamic acceleration, which is the actual acceleration of the animal across those 3 axes. And then she continues walking again, and you get these undulating patterns. In terms of the dynamic acceleration, you get these large magnitude spikes with each footfall, essentially.
Compare that with, say, with the bear's resting. If it's just sitting, looking from side to side, then you get, fairly low magnitude acceleration.
You can see it's considerably different compared to the walking signature. Instead of getting that undulating pattern, you really get this slow wave as she's moving her head from side to side.
This was likely a very taxing endeavor for this individual, because from the capture on the 26th of August to the capture on the 26th of October, that bear lost 21% of her body weight. Additionally, at her first capture, she had a yearling cub with her. The cub was 350 pounds. On the second capture, that cub was not with her. So someplace along the way, either during the swim or on the trek back across the pack ice, she lost that cub. This long trek was quite expensive for her. All told, she swam 425 miles over the 9-day period.
The accelerometer itself is collecting at extremely high frequencies. The tags we're using are recording 16 times a second, and so it's really high frequencies, and you think about something recording 16 times a second over the course of an entire year, It's extreme amount of data that we're hoping to collect. But because it's recording at such a high frequency, it's basically able to capture all those small changes in body motion that the animal is making.
The frequency of long-distance swimming has increased substantially by polar bears in the Beaufort Sea. The distances they have to cover, the frequency that it actually occurs, we're seeing it more often. Prior to 1996, however, sea ice generally did not melt away from the continental shelf. So polar bears could either remain over the continental shelf, or if they were on land, it was just a short distance. That has changed dramatically since 1996. Polar bears now, many of them, when they decide to go for a swim, it involves a considerable commitment in time and energy. And I don't think they make that decision when they're about to swim because they don't know how far away the sea ice actually is. They're just doing what they have evolved to do, and this is go for a swim. Now it's just a lot further and potentially energetically expensive for them.